And it's time for Lefties Losing It. Let's start with some happy news. CNN has lost nearly 2/3 of its viewers since 2016 amid growing fears the network is circling the drain. What a happy headline that is. But I can't imagine why CNN is struggling. After all, they have a token conservative now. It's Scott Jennings is on the network. Here are 5 lefties, including the host, just yelling at him for existing.
Not what she said. Are you saying they can't figure out how to vote?
Let me offer the proof.
Are you saying they can't figure out how to vote?
This is the exact same argument.
It is a fact.
I can't understand why that's not rating. It's hugely entertaining. Let's have an example of the balance that CNN is famous for from Abby Phillip. Let's see Abby's always consistent analysis when Ilhan Omar was sprayed with salad dressing compared to when President Trump was shot by a deranged lefty.
Ilhan Omar, in particular, has been the center, and you heard it there from the president, the center of a lot of awful attacks. He called her garbage. Donald Trump is actually responsible for the vitriol. So is there going to be any acknowledgement of that? Should there be? It's not about the politics of the individual. I mean, look at these people. The thing that they have in common is their complete lack of mental stability. Why is that not the conversation? Why are we in this place of who's to blame? Is it the Democrats or the Republicans? The Republicans aren't trying to assassinate the Democrats. And a lot of talk of they.
And then
when it's not a they, it's just a person. It's an individual.
Let's hear now from trans activist Lily Tino Contino, who has gone from being passive-aggressive to aggressive-aggressive. Fresh from being investigated by authorities for filming real women in female restrooms in Disney, Contino is claiming that if you're guilty of the crime of misgendering, then there will be a confrontation. Oh yes, the dudes are losing it.
Because if we meet and you call me by the wrong pronouns, it's going to be a confrontation. And I don't think you want that. I think you just want to go about your day. I want to go about my day. I don't want to have to be upset about getting misgendered. And I know you don't want to purposefully upset people. And if you do want to purposefully upset people, then you need to look in the mirror and ask yourself why. Why am I like this? Why do I want to make people's lives harder? Why don't I want to lift up my fellow human?
You see, it's not about making lives harder. It's about not submitting to bullying or indulging in the delusions of confused folk, even if those confused folk are threatening confrontation or violence. Now to Munich, where Secretary of State Marco Rubio delivered an exceptional speech, genuinely profound, but Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, well, she wasn't impressed.
Was a pure appeal to Western culture. My favorite part was when he said that American cowboys came from Spain.
I thought they came from Winnetou, but
I believe the Mexicans and descendants of African enslaved peoples would like to have a word on that.
Actually, it did originate in Spain, and AOC might also want to reflect on why Mexicans speak Spanish. How did that happen? Let's hear more from AOC. Here she talks about culture and Western civilization.
A fluid, evolving thing that is a response to the conditions that we live in. And so they want to take this mantle of culture. At the end of the day, though, it is very thin.
The values that underpinned Western civilization, Western culture are very thin. She's a Marxist and not a particularly bright one or an eloquent one. Listen here as AOC struggles to answer the most obvious of questions about Taiwan. This is painful.
Would and should the U.S. actually commit U.S. troops to defend Taiwan if China were to move?
I think that this is such a, I think that this is of course a very long-standing policy of the United States, and I think what we are hoping for is that we want to make sure that we never get to that point.
Oh dear, they're not sending their best, are they? But it gets worse. Also on that panel was the Democrat governor of Michigan, Gretchen Whitmer. Listen to how she flounders trying to answer a question about Ukraine, and she even says that AOC is much better equipped to talk about geopolitics. The AOC we just heard, really? Goodness.
On Ukraine, what does victory look like?
No, please. I'd love to hear your answer.
It is. The two that I am on the panel with are much more steeped in foreign policy than a governor is. But I do think that Ukraine's independence, keeping their land mass, and having the support of all the allies, I think is the goal from my vantage point.
Now, compare the Democrats' contribution at the Munich Security Conference to this blistering address from the Secretary of State, Marco Rubio, who spelled out to America's European allies that the Trump administration has no interest in being polite and orderly caretakers of the West's managed decline. This is brilliant. Listen to every word.
And this is why we do not want our allies to be weak, because that makes us weaker. We want allies who can defend themselves so that no adversary will ever be tempted to test our collective strength. This is why we do not want our allies to be shackled by guilt and shame. We want allies who are proud of their culture and of their heritage, who understand that we are heirs to the same great and noble civilization, and who together with us are willing and able to defend it. And this is why we do not want allies to rationalize the broken status quo rather than reckon with what is necessary to fix it. For we in America have no interest in being polite and orderly caretakers of the West's managed decline.
And Marco Rubio made it clear that the US alliance with Europe must be built on strength and the values of Western civilization. I'm warning you, you may need a cold shower or a cigarette after hearing this.
We do not seek to separate, but to revitalize an old friendship and renew the greatest civilization in human history. What we want is a reinvigorated alliance that recognizes that what has ailed our societies is not just a set of bad policies, but a malaise of hopelessness and complacency. An alliance is the alliance that we want is one that is not paralyzed into inaction by fear. Fear of climate change, fear of war, fear of technology. Instead, we want an alliance that boldly races into the future. And the only fear we have is the fear of the shame of not leaving our nations prouder, stronger, and wealthier for our children. An alliance ready to defend our people, to safeguard our interests, and to preserve the freedom of action that allows us to shape our own destiny. Not one that exists to operate a global welfare state and atone for the purported sins of past generations.
Joining me now is Newsweek's senior editor-at-large, Josh Hammer. Josh, the Secretary of State received a standing ovation after that speech. That is something to behold from the European political class. And that speech was profound, every single word.
Rita, it's a defining speech for Marco Rubio. He has already been a historic Secretary of State. He's the first man since Henry Kissinger to serve in the dual capacity as Secretary of State and National Security Advisor. He has arguably been Donald Trump's #1 foreign policy advisor when it comes to a lot of Donald Trump's louder, bolder moves on the world stage, things like the operation in Iran last June, things like the Nicolas Maduro extraction in Venezuela just about a month and a half ago there. And now he is coming to this venue deep in the heart of Europe and just giving an absolute barn burner of a half-hour speech. Frankly, as someone who follows Marco Rubio pretty closely, I think back actually to a speech that he also gave in Jerusalem, a much shorter speech. He gave about a 6 to 7, and maybe 10-minute speech in Jerusalem back in September to commemorate the opening of this new archaeological excavation there in the city of David. And he spoke very similarly about how the origins of Western civilization were laid here in these stones here in Jerusalem. And I kind of heard those overtones there with his reminder to the European powers, or at least the European former powers, that they have a rich heritage and a rich civilizational history. And he's basically saying, we don't want to divorce you. We're actually quite happy historically with being your partners when it comes to NATO, when it comes to the mutual threat of the Soviet Union, the Cold War there. But guess what? The calendar is now 2026. And there are a lot of different threats on the world stage. There is the harrowing rise of communist China. There is the rise of Islamism there. And if Europe wants to remain relevant, they have to recover what they once were. They're not doing a very good job of that, are we there? So it's a very solemn warning to the European elites. And the fact that it, frankly, was received with no shortage of applause, as you correctly mentioned, Rita, shows that perhaps there is more of an appetite than some of us give them credit for actually listening to this message. The proof ultimately, of course, will be in the pudding on that.
It will. I think it's a very fractured Europe right now. You've got countries that have heard that warning, that have turned to the centre right, from Italy to Finland, and you've got other countries that are just further doubling down on that leftist mentality, that neo-Marxist ideology. Now, I want to play you Marco Rubio here, warning Western allies about outsourcing their power to systems beyond their control. This sounds like a rejection of globalization.
An alliance that does not allow its power to be outsourced, constrained, or subordinated to systems beyond its control. One that does not depend on others for the critical necessities of its national life. And one that does not maintain the polite pretense that our way of life is just one among many, and that asks for permission before it acts.
Josh, she rejected the notion there that all cultures are equal, something that AOC was very aggrieved about when she spoke later. He unequivocally stated in that speech the value of Western civilization. You either protect it and advance it, or you destroy it from within, Josh.
Look, Rita, Marco Rubio is a nationalist. He is not a globalist. He is not a transnationalist. He is an American nationalist. His views when it comes to all sorts of issues have taken a markedly national direction. They've been really trending that way for many, many years now. I actually remember back in 2019, again, I follow Marco Rubio pretty closely, especially as a Floridian by choice. He gave a speech at the Catholic University of America, I believe was in 2019, articulating his theory of economics, which he referred to as common good capitalism, which is kind of a more nationalist, less laissez-faire, absolutist approach to economics there. That calls for reshoring supply chains, things like trying to produce more manufacturing at home. Basically a rejection back then in economics when it comes to the siren song of globalism there. And globalism certainly has had its benefits when it comes to economics, lower prices, free trade, et cetera there. But the point that Rubio is making correctly is that it's come at a pretty steep cost as well. And now here in Munich, he's doing a very similar thing when it comes not just to economics, but also when it comes to culture. He is correctly saying that not all cultures are equal. In fact, some cultures, I would argue, I think probably Rubio would too, are objectively better than others in pretty much every demonstrable, empirical way possible when it comes to standards of living, when it comes to GDP, when it comes to material wealth, when it comes to subjective indications of personal happiness there. And you know, this is the modern Republican Party, Rita. This is the Republican Party of the 2020s. It's not George W. Bush's Republican Party. Back in his second inaugural address in January 2005, Bush famously spoke of the freedom agenda and how it was America's role to forcibly export its idiosyncratic version of Western liberalism to all places of the world there. He basically said that the Taliban just wants this Jeffersonian Lockean liberalism. And here's Marco Rubio 20 years later basically saying, actually, no. That's not the case. There are some cultures that don't want what we want there. And ultimately, it's up to America to protect her interests and then to ally with like-minded countries to better secure and protect their own regions there. That's in theory where Europe comes in. Again, the relevant part here is in theory.
Very similar tones to J.D. Vance's speech in Europe last year, and that was seen as groundbreaking by many. Now, talking about destroying the West from within, I want to play you a clip of former President Barack Obama claiming here that it's Republicans and generally those on the right who push angry, divisive, us-them politics.
The other side does the mean, angry,
demagoguery,
exclusive, us, them, divisive politics. That's their home court.
Yeah.
Our court is coming together.
Oh, wow. Josh, what's your response to that wild projection from the former president?
Doesn't this guy have better things to do with his time? That's actually literally my first take. We all saw Hillary Clinton there speaking at the Munich Security Conference, and whether it's her or Barack Obama, don't these old Democrats? Do they have nothing better to do with their time? Does Hillary Clinton not prefer to go shill for the Qatar-sponsored Clinton Foundation? Does Barack Obama not prefer to go shill with Michelle Obama on their multi-million-dollar Netflix package? Why do this? First of all, historically speaking, it was the job of former presidents to basically fade into obscurity, and it's very notable that Barack Hussein Obama was the first president to not leave Washington D.C. I cannot emphasize this point enough, Rita. There was a long tradition going back a century and a half, a very, very long time in America, where you would physically move out because that was a symbol that you were going to remove yourself and fade out of the public eye. George W. Bush, for instance, he had many flaws as a president, but to his great credit, he went totally out of the picture there. He went back to Dallas, Texas. He focused on painting. He was taking art classes. Can't Barack Obama just take art classes? He's just such a narcissist. He just can't avoid the public image. So that's my very first takeaway. I think the second takeaway is, dude, what are you smoking? This is the guy who famously, on the precipice of being elected president in 2008, said that he was out there and that he was going to stick it to the bitter clingers who were bitterly clinging to their guns and their religion. Just days before he was elected over John McCain, he said that we are days away from fundamentally transforming the United States of America. And it should be self-evident that one does not seek to fundamentally transform that which he loves. And frankly, most Americans love their country. So you want to talk about divisive? Well, that was pretty divisive. His whole presidency was divisive, actually. The Obamacare statute, the Iran nuclear deal, the this, the that there. When he famously stood over Paul Ryan, Eric Cantor, and said, hey, guys, I won, you lost, as his justification for passing Obamacare. So he's the last person in the world who should talk about this there. The chutzpah, frankly, is through the roof. But again, as I said, this is the guy who famously refused to move out of D.C. because he just thinks that he is that much brighter and more special than everyone else. Guess what? He's not.
Well, maybe he didn't move out of DC because he had that infamous third term under the Biden years. There was a lot of conjecture about really who was calling the shots, because we know it wasn't Joe Biden. He was not cognitively sound throughout much of that presidency. Now, I mentioned earlier in Lefties Losing It that CNN has lost nearly 2/3 of its viewership since 2016, just an incredible decline. And when compared to the same part of the year in 2021, the drops were even more pronounced, Josh. 71% for prime time and 73% during the day. This is according to the latest Nielsen ratings. How can they reverse this, Josh? Or do they even have an appetite for reversing it? Because they have become an activist network. Ratings and breaking news don't seem to be a huge consideration.
Rita, frankly, I don't know that they actually want to turn this around. I genuinely am not, because frankly, viewers have been fleeing the network for years and years and years, and they've done virtually nothing to try to change course. There are precisely two people on CNN who are worth watching. One is my Salem colleague, Scott Jennings, who is absolutely amazing and owns the libs there on a seemingly day in, day out basis. The other is Harry Enton, who I've known since we were 18 years old. Harry and I go way back, who is just a very funny, well-spoken, purely objective, nerdy polls guy. He's no ideology, no policy, no nothing, just pure entertainment kind down the polls. So the only two people that have any kind of core viewership these days are, one, the token conservative, two, the totally non-ideological, nerdy polls guy there. As for all the other jokers there, Jake Tapper, Wolf Blitzer, Caitlin Collins, my God, there. Who was watching these people? Who was the person who was getting up in the morning and saying, oh my God, I cannot wait to see what Caitlin Collins or Erin Burnett says on CNN today. That demographic, to the extent that ever existed, simply does not exist anymore. And it's actually not just a cable news thing. A lot of people say, oh, People are fleeing cable news in general. Not true, actually. Fox News currently is putting up the greatest numbers in the history of American cable news. So people are definitely not fleeing Fox News. They're fleeing CNN faster than you could say Wolf Blitzer, though, because they've been offering the same barely warmed over pablum for years and years and years. And there's some rumors as to whether or not the owners might seek to divest CNN there. But either way, this is not going to have a happy ending if they continue on their current route.
Well, their digital traffic, as a lot of people point to online viewership, because that's growing at a rapid pace. But again, CNN seems to be struggling there against competitors. So it's the product, it's the content that people are rejecting. Josh Hammer, thank you so much for your time tonight.
Thank you, Rita.